Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I thought I would address the issue of why social protection has now appeared on the policy agenda of Asia, and why is it so critical, and basically also show what are some of the critical issues that we need to consider as we move forward for other sessions. So let me start with Asia currently. Basically, all of us know that there is a development divide. I mean, Asia, as I've said earlier, is a diverse region. You have the economic powerhouses like China, like India, but at the same time, we also know that this is a region where 4.2 billion people live, literally more than 60% of the world's population. In 2010, the regional growth was 8.8%, led by the economic powerhouses of China at 10.3% and India at 8.6%. But at the same time, there are still 10 countries which register annual growth of below 1%. So basically, we have 14 least developed countries in the Asian region, and many small island states. Now, people living in extreme poverty have indeed declined in Asia from 1.6 billion in 1990 to 0.9 billion in 2008. So if someone asks, have we achieved the Millennium Development Goals of poverty and hunger? In terms of halving the world's absolute poverty, the answer is yes at the global level because of Asia. But at the same time, what is happening to the other half? It is not enough to say that we have indeed halved the world's absolute poverty. In fact, the majority of women still depend upon precarious and vulnerable forms of employment. And in India and in Bangladesh, for example, 90% of all the female workforce are indeed in the informal sector. And whilst even when we say that the Millennium Goals of water will be met, because of the huge population of Asia, 1.8 billion people still do not have access to adequate sanitation. Now, despite the gains and also the fact that in many countries you have high-tech medical services and so on, the region still has unacceptably high rates of maternal mortality and under 5 mortality. And many countries will not meet their Millennium Development Targets because of gender-related MDG issues. And in fact, the figures are quite shocking. It's something like about 250,000 women die giving life. And this is Asia Pacific. Now, the other, the point that I would like to make is that there is a development divide. And that even if we see the fact that Asia Pacific, we often hear that Asia is a center of stability, it is a growth pole of economic recovery for the global economic system, and that we are the ones that are pulling the whole recovery. At the same time, that message hides a lot of realities in the Asia Pacific region. So I wanted to go a little bit further, a little bit deeper into the development challenges of the Asia Pacific region currently existing. Poverty remains persistent, though the 980 million people who are still poor. Inequalities are widening, not just within countries, but also between countries. And there are challenges in closing various development gaps, be it infrastructure gaps, knowledge gaps, technology gaps, education gaps, health gaps, gender gaps, and many other social areas, including resource gaps. At the same time, there are ethnic tensions and these are increasing in several plural societies, and with minority groups being the most excluded, and the indigenous groups being the most excluded. And there are weak governance in some countries, including in some of the high-growth countries. So basically, we just heard there are issues of democracy and governance, including in some of the richer countries. And that our financial systems, in fact, Asia is not poor, despite all this. Asia as a continent is not poor. We have actually, in reserves, originally I thought it was 7 trillion, but now with the accumulation, it's 7.5 trillion US dollars in reserve. But the continent, we do not have actually coordinated and adequate financial architecture for utilizing the region's savings efficiently to meet the growing needs. Now, our rapid growth has put serious strains on the environment. In fact, in Asia, we are we actually emit 34% of all CO2 emissions. So this development, our development model that is very much export-led, very much based on the manufacturing sector of low-cost labor, directed towards the G3 country, cannot go on, in fact, and cannot go on precisely because we are having a situation where there's a debt fuel crisis in the G3 countries, and therefore there is a shrinking of the export markets, and therefore there's a need to look for new drivers of growth in the Asia region and to be able to develop higher aggregate demand in the Asia region itself, either nationally or regionally. At the same time, our model has been very much grow first and distribute later, or grow first and clean up later. So basically, we have not balanced our economy, our society, and our environmental pillars of development. Now, as a result, but not only, but that we are facing more frequent natural disasters because of changing weather patterns. And the region currently remains highly vulnerable to natural disasters. In fact, more than 200 million people were affected each year over the past decade. 90% of the world's total happen to be in Asia. And in fact, as I said, I've just come from Thailand, where over 8 million people have been affected by the floods. And because of that, there will be, in fact, a reduction of 2% point of their annual GDP. Now, the other development challenge that I would like to focus on in the Asia-Pacific region has to do with demographic changes. And this will have profound implication for development policies and for services, including for social protection. Firstly is the youth bulge in certain countries and still the chronic challenges of youth employment. I think the fact that we have a growing number of people, but at the same time, difficulty to get adequate and decent employment for the young. In fact, across the region, some 1.1 billion workers remain in vulnerable forms of employment. And therefore, when we are looking at labor markets, we need to look at the labor market segmentation, but also really to look at the fact that, in fact, most of the people who have been able to support families still depend on work. So because of the lack of social protection, work is fundamentally the way in which social protection is delivered in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, aging, many of our countries is undergoing aging, and therefore with aging would be the increased cost of support services, health costs, pensions in the context of social protection. But increasingly, there's also increased urbanization that is really putting pressure on the need for the services in the urban areas, the issue of sustainable urbanization, and also the whole issue of moving population. Now, but there are tremendous opportunities in the Asia-Pacific region. It remains, as I mentioned, the fastest growing region in the world with a rapidly growing middle class. There is rising income and decline in absolute poverty, as I have mentioned, and there is the untapped potential of women and girls in many societies. The region, I think for the first time, is re-looking at itself and reinvesting in itself in terms of regional connectivity, in terms of trade facilitation. Many countries, we are helping them to develop what are called single windows, as well as the development of a more coordinated regional market, and also the fact that we are trying to emphasize income security so that the poor, so that the 980 million people who are poor, through income security and social protection, if it is invested in, could actually participate in the market and could contribute to the lack of aggregate demand in our G3 countries. So throughout we have said that this is a time where closing development gaps and turning challenges, our challenges, can be converted into opportunities in order to sustain growth. So it's not an either-or. It's not an either-or equation whereby we are looking at social protection and social investment as a cost. We need to see it as an investment, and we need to see it, and we need to turn the whole paradigm around by looking at it actually as a means of sustaining our economic growth, and it's a new driver of economic growth, and to basically to release these reserves, if possible, and greater, and also the stimulus packages into many of the social infrastructure that is needed to get this growth going, in terms of the investment in social protection. Now, there are tremendous opportunities for the region as well in terms of regional cooperation and self-solve solutions and the transfer of knowledge. There's more willingness, and many people have used the ESCAP platform or the ASEAN platform to share closer experiences, and this is a tremendous opportunity because people would like to learn what works. It's not necessary to invent the wheel over and over again. I also would like to say this is also a tremendous opportunity to invest in green growth, and to really try to look at how is it possible to move forward to a more sustainable, inclusive development paradigm. Now, one of the reasons why social protection has come high up on all the policy agendas is because of the new vulnerabilities and future challenges. We have just faced persistent high food prices and increasing energy costs, and this have indeed slowed poverty reduction, especially in the developing countries of Asia. In fact, ESCAP calculated that the global and the commodity price increases in 2010, in fact, have led to 42 million people falling or remaining in poverty, and will delay, in fact, the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals by 5 years. Now, at the same time, we just had the meeting on the least developed countries in Istanbul. And what was very clear is the weaknesses in the capacity, in the productive capacity of the least developed countries to benefit from connectivity and from regional growth. And it is critical that if we are to reduce poverty, or if we are to provide for much larger markets, we need to bring the least developed countries into a closer connectivity with the higher growth countries. So many of us have talked about not country by country solution, but actually economic corridors. And in fact, currently ESCAP is negotiating not just, we've finished the work on the Asian Highway and the Trans-Asian Railway, but the third treaty that we are negotiating is on the dry ports. And what it does is that it links the landlocked, least developed countries to the more prosperous coastal areas as one economic belt, if you like. So there's new ways. So what I'm showing is that there are new ways and new thinking in the Asia-Pacific region. And this would be absolutely critical as people are rethinking to also rethink our social equity agenda. Now, economic volatility and exposure to global shocks will increase as the region connects globally. Because there's no way, as we have seen, when there's an accumulation of risks in the financial sector, everybody in a globalized, interconnected world gets affected. And Asia had learned from the 1997 financial crisis and was able to protect itself somewhat because of its reserves, but at the same time, there are new rebalancing that is taking place in the global economy, and Asia has to be a player in that. Now, there are challenges, of course, of the aging population, and currently the elderly number something like about 490 million in 2010, but this will increase to 1.2 billion by 2050. And traditional support structures are breaking down. We cannot rely in the traditional systems whereby the extended family absorbs the shocks. These shocks are so huge that it is not possible. That's why you have basically the slipping down of 42 million people into poverty, precisely because the financial systems, if you like, affected the real economy and affected workers in particular. And of course, the increased extreme weather events and climate change will create new forms of vulnerability. And I would like to actually link this. In fact, if you look at what happened with the floods in Thailand, it actually affected the supply chains. It affected the motor industry, it affected the electronic industry, and the impact is not just for Thailand or for Southeast Asia, but it literally affected Europe and America because they couldn't get the component parts for their computers. So because of the interconnectedness of the production system and the supply chain, when you have weather conditions of these sorts, you have tremendous vulnerabilities that also hits throughout the whole interconnected belt. And I also would like to refer here to the fact that I have just visited with the Secretary General many of the small island states, in particular Kiribati, and here the issue of eco-migrants is a real issue in the sense that islands are indeed disappearing. So for many of us, you know, we will be affected through weather changes, but for many people it is really their survival. They literally have to abandon their lives and their livelihoods and to shift place. And already it is happening in the Kiribati. Now, most of the policy framework, when we're talking about policies, talks about stable, investment-friendly macroeconomic policy systems. It talks about industrial policy, infrastructure development. It talks about the financing for development, about the innovation technology economy, knowledge-based economy, and then we are looking for supportive global partnerships, financing for development. In fact, there will be an aid effectiveness meeting in Busan at the end of this month that will look at how aid should be used. There's a market issue of market access and the issue of aid for trade, and then South-South cooperation. But what we need to emphasize here is that this is not enough. This policy agenda is not enough. We need to really look at how do we provide the economic and social infrastructure. So what we want to look at is basically the social equity agenda or the social policy agenda for inclusive development, of which social policy, it has to be central. And I say this because there is a recognition of the role of social protection now. In fact, the reason, what I call the coming together of the multiple threats to development, or the multiple crises, can be seen as providing an opportunity to direct the development path to a more inclusive and balanced pattern of economic growth, because it requires a rethinking. It's not something that you can do one part at a time. It requires a paradigm shift, and this provides a tremendous opportunity. Many people talk about a balanced development. How do you balance your economy with your society, with your ecological systems? We have heard several discussions of the social protection flaw, especially those who have been working with the International Labour Organization. And this is basically an emphasis that looks at access to essential transfers as well as to essential services. And it is critical to address the issues of inequality, vulnerability, and exclusion. And I think some of you know that Juan Somavia, in fact, in a recent seminar, launched this whole issue of an era of social justice. And at the end of it was really to look at what was required as a basic social protection flaw to address existing social inequalities. Now, I think that beyond that, when we look at the role of social protection, it must focus not just on existing inequalities, but also to look at the causes of exclusion, not just in terms of the outcomes, but really to look at what are the structural causes of exclusion. And also social protection should be a mechanism to create opportunities for participation and to broaden what I call the aggregate demand and consumption and growth patterns. It should also complement a progressive social and economic policy which reflects national priorities as well as resources. In other words, social protection has to be part of a much larger social policy agenda. But of course, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. And because there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, it is really the source of this, the focus of this seminar. I think over the next few days, we'll be looking at a number of issues in terms of advancing an agenda for Asia, what we call shaping our social agenda. And what I would like to put here that still needs discussion, that's why I didn't want to close the equation here, is what type of social protection systems will graduate people from poverty and vulnerability towards self-reliance and opportunities. I heard when I did a presentation on social protection in Singapore recently, someone came up to me and said, will it create dependency? And I think the whole issue is actually to graduate people from vulnerability and to provide them with self-reliance and with opportunities to move beyond that. How do you integrate social protection into both the economic and social development strategies of countries? And how do we finance the social protection floor and the staircase, especially for those who are least able to contribute to the systems? And how do you reach the most vulnerable population, the informal economic workers, the workers in the rural areas, and the casual workers, including women? And finally, how can we best enhance our knowledge through the sharing of regional experiences and approaches? What lessons from other regions can inform the varied social protection needs of the Asia-Pacific region? I put this up because I think that there are many lessons that we need to learn from Latin America, from Europe, and also from within Asia things that have worked, things that have not worked, and how can we move from case studies, from innovations and pilots to a much larger social agenda or social policy agenda that has much greater impact, so that it can be an integrated, balanced development that is both inclusive and sustainable. I thank you.